welcome to Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed, where conversations are designed for nonprofit leaders by nonprofit leaders to inspire, educate, and motivate. Get ready to dive into the world of nonprofits where the nerdy passion and unstoppable dedication of those making a real impact is celebrated. Together with your host, Jarrett Ransom, the inspiring stories, tactical insights, and game-changing strategies of nonprofit leaders will be explored. Join us for real talk with real people. Jarrett and her guests unravel the mysteries of successful fundraising, uncover the secrets of effective advocacy, and nerd out over innovative approaches to solving social challenges. Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed is your go-to podcast for no-nonsense discussions with real-life superheroes of the nonprofit sector. Get ready to unleash your inner nerdiness and discover or rediscover how to change the world together. Now let's dive in and embrace the power of our nerdy side.
Hey, nonprofit nerds. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. Joining me today is Lisa Stevenson, who brings a deep background in the nonprofit sector and a wealth of experience working alongside nonprofit leaders to strengthen their organizations from the inside out. Lisa and we had a chance to connect ahead of today's recording, and we are keeping the conversation very real, very practical, and very conversational, just like sitting down with a trusted colleague to talk through what's actually happening behind the scenes in nonprofits. So in this conversation, we dive into some of the most common financial pitfalls that nonprofits face, why having the right accounting expertise truly matters, and how strong financial management supports long-term sustainability. We also explore the role of effective financial reporting, the importance of board education, and how clear data visualization can empower leaders to make better decisions with confidence. This is one of those conversations that truly reinforces the ideas that finances are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. They too are telling a story, a trust-building tool, and a leadership responsibility. So before we dive into this conversation, I, of course, want to give a big shout out of gratitude to Bloomerang for their continued support of these important conversations, and to Fundraising Academy at National University for helping equip nonprofit leaders with the knowledge and the tools that they need to lead with clarity and confidence. Thank you to both of you for allowing me to have these important conversations and to share them with all of you. All right, let's get into the conversation with Lisa. I hope you enjoy. Well, hey there and welcome. I am so excited for today's guest, Lisa Stevenson. Lisa, thank you for saying yes. Thank you for joining me. And thanks for your willingness to nerd out with me.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Jarrett. I'm enjoying being asked to do this. It's a new experience for me.
You're going to be fantastic. This conversation is one that is so very needed. And so I always like to start off by asking a pretty basic question, one that I'm sure you answer regularly, but tell all of us, myself included, but our listeners mostly, a little bit about yourself, Lisa, and the roles that you play in this wonderful sector that we've all loved so very dearly, the nonprofit sector. So yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, my name is Lisa Stevenson. I am a CPA. My educational background is actually not in accounting, it's in business. 25 years ago, I was looking for a job and I was in between jobs and I went into a nonprofit to volunteer. I did some things for them, and 2 days later, they called me and offered me a job. And I took the job, but it was with the condition that I was looking for something else, and this was just going to be temporary. I ended up working for that nonprofit for 9 years.
So I love that.
Not so temporary. And it was really during that time that I developed my accounting skills. I developed my passion for the nonprofit community. And so when I decided to start my firm, which I started now, 12 years ago, time flies, I really knew then that it was nonprofit. I had already developed the passion for it. And what I realized is that there are so many nonprofit organizations out there, but there are really limited resources for them to get accounting and bookkeeping assistance. And so for me, it was a natural fit. I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work with nonprofits to support them because they provide such a value to our community.
I love that story. I didn't know that was your origin into the nonprofit space, but I feel like I've had that too. Like you just kind of get sucked into this work, into this life. I eat, breathe, sleep it. I know you do too, which leads me to asking you another question is really, as you serve as the founder, president, for the NPO accountants team, and what really inspired you to focus on providing this financial expertise specifically for nonprofits? And also, I'm curious why you think financial literacy is so very critical for the success of these missions.
Great question. A lot of information, my brain's going several different directions, but where I kind of feel like I'm the path I'm going to lead us through is, financial literacy is important because nonprofit leaders, they really need to have an understanding of the financial reports they're looking at so that they can make decisions. The decisions that they make are going to impact the nonprofit organization. Whether or not the organizations get funding depend on some of the decisions that get made. So, for me, it was, I look at nonprofits and I realize that there's so many of them, not a lot of resources, and because I am so passionate about it, I was like, well, this is what I should do. And by starting a firm, it led for me to bring others into the fold. So it wasn't just me doing this because there's only so much work that one person can do. But by starting a firm, now I'm staffing my firm with people who also have the same passion I do. They're learning, all the ins and outs of nonprofit accounting so that we can, have a broader reach into the community. So I hope that answers it.
That's a great answer. And I appreciate that because it's, I tell my clients all the time, and I'm sure you see this too, Lisa, like board members will, depending on the size of the organization, right? Like they'll put someone in a treasurer position by default because, oh, by the way, they are a banking representative. So clearly they know what they're doing, but really seeing the difference between the nonprofit accounting best practice versus the for-profit accounting best practice. I see that all too often. I know you and I have had offline conversations about some of this in real life as well. And I do see that many nonprofits, they struggle with accurate reporting. They struggle with the financial management. So I want to ask you, and to the extent in which you're willing to share, what are some of the most common financial pitfalls that you see and how might organizations avoid them?
Really good question there. Kind of, in fact, to continue with what you just said, when people join a nonprofit board, if they have a finance or banking background, they often end up in that treasurer role. I know as a CPA in nonprofit, I always end up in the treasurer role when I serve on a board, but sometimes that's a pitfall because you assume because that person has some type of a finance type background that they understand nonprofit accounting, and that is not always true. Nonprofit accounting is very specific. There's some particular ways that nonprofits do things. For example, revenue recognition can be very complicated. The way nonprofits record revenue is very industry specific. And so it doesn't even translate outside of the nonprofit community. Kind of in the same vein, one of the other pitfalls that I feel like is very related is organizations, when they hire someone to handle the bookkeeping and accounting, they think sometimes that because QuickBooks is user-friendly and easy to use, that anyone can do it. And, to be in compliance with generally accepted accounting principles is actually quite complicated. So to, hire someone who doesn't really understand that, it can really do the organization a disservice because if things are not recorded correctly, then if the organization undergoes an audit, things may not go well. They may end up with material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, and nobody wants that. So, to avoid. So back to the, well, how do they avoid these pitfalls? It really does come down to when they interview someone, whether it be to be their bookkeeper, accountant, or to serve on their board, they really do need to ask about the person's understanding of nonprofits. And, if the person doesn't have a full grasp or understanding, that's okay, but at least you know where they're at. So you know what kind of training that they need to have in order to fulfill their role. You can't just rest on your laurels and assume that because they're an accountant that they really know what they're doing. You really do have to ask that question. And sometimes it can be a little, I don't know, uncomfortable to ask someone, like, oh, I know you're CPA, but what do you really know about nonprofits? But you're doing yourself and the organization a disservice if you don't ask the question. You really need to be able to ascertain the skills, knowledge, and expertise of the person in that role.
Yeah, solid advice. That due diligence is important. And I think too, I mean, I'm not surprised, Lisa, that you are pigeonholed into the treasurer or finance committee, right? But I think it's also, I think I would be pigeonholed in the fundraising committee, right? Like that, they would just be like, oh, great, you love fundraising. We definitely need that. But I think too, asking the board member, asking them, is this a committee or a role in which you want to serve? Because I've worked with so many boards, you as well, Lisa, where it's like, someone coming from a banking position, they do that all day, every day. They might want to try something different. And so I think just having that conversation, moreover than the due diligence, but, instead of pigeonholing these individuals, I just think that's a great conversation. And maybe I'm advocating for those that I've heard throughout my career saying, I always get pigeonholed into this committee because of what I do. So anyway, I went on a little side tangent, but I loved your avoidance of these pitfalls, providing us that information, recommendations on how we can not make those same mistakes, which takes to like wanting to leverage our data. I think data is sexy. I say this all the time, right? And I think that finances, numbers also help to tell a story. So I would love to hear from you, Lisa, how you and your firm, how are you advising your clients and these nonprofit leaders to best leverage their financial data and, not just for compliance, but also to help drive these strategic decisions and to maximize the impact?
Yeah, well, beyond compliance, the monthly financial reports, they really serve to inform the board. However, boards need to have an understanding of what to look at and what to look for. And sometimes that's something that's lacking, something in my experience as someone who serves on nonprofit boards. I'll go in and the financial reporting package that I have the organization put together, some of them said, we've never seen this report before, or no one's ever explained this to us before. And, just like you said, you think data sexy. I always say, I'm a numbers person. I love the numbers. I want to see the numbers. The numbers mean something to me. I can look at the numbers and understand what I'm looking at, but that's not true for everybody. So, what I advise boards is, one, there are 4 standard nonprofit reports for accounting, and they need to know what those are. And then beyond that, they need to know, well, when I look at those 4 reports, what do those reports mean? And, I mentioned those 4 reports. It's, the statement of financial position, the statement of activities, the statement of cash flows, and the statement of functional expenses. If you don't know what those are, or you've never seen them on your board, I would ask as a board member, I'd ask to see those. And if I don't understand them, or if you don't understand them, really ask someone to come and walk you through the financials. So whether it's the accountant or bookkeeper who's performing your financials, if they feel comfortable coming to the board and presenting that, or maybe you work with an audit firm or a review firm, have that accountant come walk you through the audit that they've just prepared. Most of them really welcome those kinds of opportunities. But accountants are kind of known for not necessarily being outgoing extroverts. So they might not necessarily put themselves out there. They might wait to be asked. So I encourage boards, don't be afraid to ask your accountant. They probably would love to nerd out, to use one of your phrases, but they want to be asked. So ask them to come, get the information that you need. And if, internally you don't have someone, there are external training opportunities for board members. Various firms offer, ongoing CPEs or training. Some of them are free. So there's a variety of resources out there. You just have to look.
Well, and I appreciate you reiterating, you just have to ask, right? Like ask your bookkeeper, ask your accountant, see if this is something that they can share. And even the treasurer, like maybe the treasurer can be the one to help paint the picture. And I'm talking like a visual, right? Like data visualization to go along with the numbers. That is so critical. And I do think, I love that you love the numbers, because you can read them so very well. And you're right, not everyone can. I am one of those that cannot. I have had to train myself how to read the numbers, right? It's just not by default my go-to, my comfort zone. But of course, over my career in the roles that I've held, is so important for me to know, so important for me to challenge my own learning in that space, Lisa. And then also, like educate myself in a space that isn't so by default familiar to me. So I want to ask, beyond these numbers that you love so very much, and I am learning to love so very much, how does, I don't know, perhaps strong financial management for nonprofits, how does that translate into better outcomes for the communities that we're serving? Because I just think that numbers speak volumes, and I believe that it does translate into better outcomes. But I'd love to hear from you, because that's just my perspective. And I think you in the financial world might have a little different approach.
Yeah. So as you probably know, as most people do, nonprofits, they start because someone is super passionate. Somebody wants to provide, X to the community, and they're so into it, and the program is super strong. I mean, that's been my experience. That's what I see. However, accounting is considered one of the critical administrative systems for a nonprofit. Programming without infrastructure can ruin the organization. So really, without a clear understanding of the financials, a strong foundation of accounting and the other systems, there's lots of other things behind the scenes, but things can go awry, and then it becomes too late to turn the organization around. Without financial resources, the nonprofit simply cannot continue. They can't be sustainable. And so, the financial management, the accounting, that's one of the things that happens behind the scenes. There's lots of other support services. And so organizations that are nonprofit, people who are leading those organizations, they have to realize that a nonprofit is a business. Yes, it's a business that's not, in service to make a profit, but it doesn't mean that they don't need the reserves. They need money. They can't, balance their budget to zero, and they can't spend more than they make. And so they have to understand, just like a business needs money to sustain, they need reserves to keep things going in downtimes. All of that applies to a nonprofit. And so, again, my background being business versus accounting, I feel like sometimes I see things through a different lens than maybe a traditional accountant. But that's kind of been my approach. As I look at it, as every nonprofit is a business. And then, it needs all the things to be successful, not just the program that sparked the whole thing.
You're right. And I appreciate your answer on that, and your answer to all of these. And I think for some people, like, you've cracked the door open for them to start evaluating or reevaluating how they see their finances. And for others, Lisa, you've blown the door completely off the hinges, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, there's so much work that we have to do with this. Maybe even starting to that board education around finances. So how can people learn more about you and your amazing company, NPO Accountants? Because you've got several, as you said, you're building the team. There's several of you. So how can we learn more about you, Lisa, and your team?
Sure. Well, we have a website. It's NPO accountants with an S on the end.com. We also are on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. You can search by our firm's name, NPO Accountants. So there's a variety of ways to reach us. Yeah, we welcome new clients. We are positioned to expand our firm. So, we're ready for that now.
Yeah, that's great. One final question. I always like to save this one for the last because I find it to be inspiring, motivational, just, some good words to leave us here as we wrap up this wonderful conversation, Lisa. And the question is, what is a takeaway, a final takeaway, maybe a final piece of sage advice that you would want other leaders that are listening to this conversation to know?
Ah, so and again, maybe looping back to our conversation about board service is, nonprofits, to set themselves up for success, they not only need a strong board, but they really need to educate and equip their board members with the information and tools they need. So, to gloss over or forego a board training opportunity, I feel like does the organization a disservice. And, the training probably needs to be a variety of things. They need to go through the bylaws. They need to fully understand the mission, vision, values of the organization. They need to understand the culture. But they also need to know, from a financial standpoint, what are their fiduciary responsibilities? A lot of boards, they know they have one, but they don't necessarily know what that means. So, the more upfront training and materials they can have, the better they'll be set up for success with serving on a nonprofit board.
Great advice. I love that that is your final takeaway. It is so very needed and very critical, I think, to the success of that board member, to the collective board itself, and then the organization at large. So, Lisa, thank you. Thanks for nerding out with me. And thanks for being a numbers person because we need you. We need you in this community, in this space, so that we can all really benefit from everyone's expertise. It's been a wonderful conversation. And again, thank you for saying yes to nerding out on this topic.
Well, you're welcome, Jarrett, and thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.